A fun trip to Rheine brings up the horror of the 30 Years' War, German board games, and a monk that went for a dunk. My stepmother has an appointment in Rheine, so my father and I tag along. Rheine was first recorded as being a town of one sort or another in 838 AD. Rheine started as a farmhouse called Rheine, near a ford in the Ems River where merchants could cross. Over time, the town grew around it. Now where the old farmhouse once stood stands a town museum called Falkenhof, after the owner in 1437. At the start of the 30 Years' War, Rheine had a Protestant government. Then Johann Cercles, commander of the Catholic League, visited in 1623. If his name rings a bell, he's the guy responsible for gutting Rothenburg ob der Tauber, working on those R's, and the sack of Magdeburg, where he let a child choir be slaughtered among other atrocities. In 1622, Rheine had refused an imperial command to billet 200 troops. Billeting was a delightful practice where roving armies would commandeer private homes. The homeowners were then forced to house and feed random soldiers or face death. Rheine had already been occupied by a Spanish army years earlier, and they didn't want to suffer through that again. They had also been told by the Protestant leadership to defend themselves in all circumstances. Rheine is a tiny town now, but at the time it was nothing but farmers. After a brief but intense siege, Cercles crushed Rheine's meager resistance. In revenge, the Catholic League raised the troop count Rheine was forced to billet from 200 to 600. The bishop of the city claimed every single citizen was guilty of insubordination and set a tax of 25,000 crowns for everyone. When he realized no one could ever pay that amount, he reduced it to 5,000. Then the Prince Bishop commanded that all the Protestants were to convert to Catholicism or leave. The entire city council and most of the rich families were Protestants. They fled rather than convert. Much like Detroit, all the wealth left and what remained was a city being scavenged to the bone. After that, Rheine limped along for the majority of the 30 Years' War in abject poverty. And finally, in a case of what Alanis Morissette would call irony, but the rest of us would call bad luck, the city burned down in 1674. Right when the official peace negotiations started to end the 30 Years' War. Swedish and Hessian troops launched glowing cannonballs into the city for 2 days in September and then once again in October. In the end, a house for every day in the year was burned to the ground. The war officially ended a year later in 1648. Today, the Biomanchi house in the Rhinemark marketplace stands as a reminder of the incident. Decoratively embedded in the gable end of the building are 7 cannonballs from the battle. Back in the present, my father and I wander the streets and shops looking at what is available. I spot a German copy of Settlers of Catan. I almost buy it, but then I realize that since I've never played the game before, I would have no idea where to start. I've found out that German board games are considered their own genre. Settlers, for instance, can have multiple winners because there are different ways to win. One more detail is that the game designer tends to be credited prominently on the box or in the player manual. I wonder if this is why Sid Meier's name is on the top of all his computer strategy games. Another feature is that the games tend to keep everyone playing until the very end and don't rely as heavily on luck. So most likely, these games end with less stabbing incidents than Monopoly. I finally get around to finding out who this guy is. I keep seeing him on a ton of bridges. My father says he's St. John of Nepomuk, the patron saint against floods. He got his Catholic superpowers when he refused to reveal confession and was drowned in the Vltava River. For some reason, they decided that made him an authority on floods, though I think he'd probably be better at being a patron saint against drowning. One of the stores is selling these barbecue marshmallows, which can't be skewered by anything larger than a toothpick. Again, American stuff in Germany is confusing.